I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You can't just react. You have to respond. So I asked him calmly, why? What had he seen, read, or heard that made him believe an entire religion deserved to be smeared like that? He hesitated. He stumbled. And that's when it became clear he wasn't speaking from knowledge. He was speaking from fear, from headlines, from half-truths on social media. He wasn't quoting scripture. He was quoting outrage. He brought up terrorism. Of course he did. It's the go-to line for critics who conflate a peaceful religion with the violence of a few. He pointed to 9/11, to ISIS, to extremist groups. But he conveniently ignored the fact that Muslims were also victims. He ignored the fact that the overwhelming majority of Muslims around the world condemn that violence. He had reduced a global faith with centuries of culture, scholarship, and beauty down to the worst actions of the worst people. I remind him that if we judged every belief system by its worst followers, none would survive. Should Christianity be judged by the Crusades, by slavery in the American South, where the Bible was used to justify it? Should atheism be blamed for Stalin or Mao? Of course not. We understand that extremists don't define the whole. But somehow, when it comes to Islam, that logic disappears. He shifted the conversation to women's rights. Another common pivot. He mentioned the hijab, Sharia law, arranged marriages. As if that's the entirety of Islamic life. As if millions of educated, empowered Muslim women didn't exist. As if Islam started oppressing women and not the systems, governments, or cultures twisting faith into control. I told him to listen to Muslim women, not speak for them. And not just the ones who fit his narrative, but all of them. The hijabi journalist, the doctor, the student, the mother, the activist. They're not silent. They're just ignored by people who've already made up their minds. At some point, he tried to walk it back. I don't hate Muslims, he said, just the ideology. But that's the trick, isn't it? Dehumanize the belief, and you can get away with demeaning the believer. It's not hate, it's criticism. It's not bigotry, it's opinion. That's how it's framed. But words like abomination aren't just opinions. They're warnings. They're fuel. And they have consequences. Because when someone hears that enough, especially from a teacher, a leader, a person with a platform, it doesn't stay as just a sentence. It becomes a story, a worldview, a fear passed down, a stereotype repeated, a door slammed shut before a conversation even begins. That's why I spoke up. And not because I'm Muslim, but because I'm human, and because I know what happens when we stay silent in the face of prejudice. It grows, it spreads. And before you know it, your neighbor, your classmate, your coworker becomes the other. Islam isn't perfect, no religion is. But to call it an abomination, that's not critique. That's hate dressed in intellect. That's fear disguised as insight. And I refuse to let that go unchecked. The truth is, Islam, like any faith, is a spectrum. It's practiced in villages and cities, in ancient rituals and modern lives. It's a grandmother praying at dawn, a teenager memorizing the Quran, a father fasting in Ramadan, a mother teaching compassion. It's charity, prayer, discipline, community. It's flawed humans trying to connect with the divine, just like any other religion. But none of that made it into his argument, because it wasn't really an argument. It was an attack. And sadly, it wasn't rare. That's why this conversation matters. Because millions of Muslims walk around carrying the weight of someone else's suspicion. They're told to explain, to condemn, to apologize for acts they never committed. And that's exhausting. Dehumanizing. Wrong. So I looked him in the eye and said, you were a teacher. You were meant to educate, not indoctrinate. And if you can't see the humanity in 1.9 billion people, maybe it's not Islam that's the problem. Maybe it's your lens. He didn't respond. Not because he couldn't, but because deep down, I think he knew. He knew he hadn't spoken from knowledge, but from noise. And maybe, just maybe, a part of him regretted it. That's all I can hope for in conversations like this. Not to win, but to crack something open, to plant doubt in certainty, to replace fear with thought. Because it's not enough to call out hate. We have to challenge it with facts, with empathy, and with a voice that says, you're not speaking the truth. You're spreading a lie, and I won't let that go unchallenged. He said it, and I had to stop him right there. The moment those words came out of his mouth, calling Islam an abomination, I knew this conversation couldn't continue like a typical back and forth. I wasn't going to let him get away with that. Not on my show. Not any show. You can have your opinions. You can disagree with religion. You can raise valid concerns. But when you cross that line, from critique to open hostility, you lose the ground beneath you. And I wasn't going to sit there and nod politely while he dragged the faith of nearly 2 billion people through the mud. So I pushed back. I asked him, point blank, how can you generalize entire religion based on what a few extremists have done? I've interviewed Muslims who are peacekeepers, doctors, professors, reformers, people dedicating their lives to education, charity, and progress. Are they an abomination too? He looked stunned for a moment, caught off guard, as if no one had ever challenged him with basic logic. That's the thing with people who weaponize their ignorance. They often expect silence, not resistance. I pressed further. If someone took the worst moments in Christian history, the Inquisition, the Crusades, residential schools, slavery, and said, and that's Christianity, you'd be ouched, wouldn't you? I asked. You'd say, that's not what my faith is about. And you'd be right. But why doesn't Islam get that same fairness? He stammered, tried to pivot, brought up terrorism again. Classic deflection. So I gave him facts. Cold, hard numbers. Did you know the vast majority of terror attacks in the West aren't committed by Muslims? And that Muslims are more likely to be victims of terrorism than perpetrators. You're more likely to be struck by lightning than killed in a jihadist attack in the UK. But no one's banning thunderstorms. That got a reaction, because facts dismantle fear. And that's what this was. Not a debate, a performance of fear. He then tried to play the free speech card. Don't I have a right to my opinion? Of course you do. That's what this platform is for. But with that right comes responsibility. When your opinion dehumanizes an entire group of people, it's not just speech anymore. It becomes something else. It becomes dangerous, especially when coming from someone who used to teach children and reminded him words have weight, especially when you've got a mic in front of you. When you call Islam an abomination, you're not just being provocative. You're reinforcing a narrative that leads to suspicion, discrimination, even violence. You're handing bigots a script. And then I asked him the most important question of all. Have you ever sat down with a practicing Muslim? Have you read the Quran? Do you even know what you're criticizing? Silence. He hadn't. Of course he hadn't. Like so many others, he'd absorbed opinions from headlines, online rants, a cherry-picked verses stripped of context. He had judged a faith not through experience, but through assumption. And yet here he was speaking with certainty. That's what I find most dangerous, the confidence of the uninformed. They shout the loudest, and when left unchecked, they shape public opinion. So I kept pushing. Calmly, clearly, but firmly. You want to criticize parts of Islamic law. Fine, many Muslims do. You want to discuss issues in Muslim majority countries. Absolutely. There's real ground for discussion. But that's not what you're doing. You're taking your limited view and declaring the entire religion broken. I saw something shift in him. Just slightly. A hesitation, maybe doubt, maybe discomfort at being called out so directly. And that's why I push back. Not to shame, not to counsel, but to confront that moment where ignorance meets resistance. Because that's where change begins. I ended with this: Islam is not a monolith. It's practiced in Indonesia, Nigeria, Turkey, the UK, in homes, in mosques, in quiet prayer and public service. It's a grandmother feeding the poor, a student fasting before exams, a doctor praying between surgeries. You don't have to agree with it, but you don't get to raise all of that just to win an argument. That's what too many people forget. Islam, like any faith, is lived. It's not just scripture. It's identity, community, struggle, hope. And to sit across from someone who once held authority in a classroom and hear them flatten all of that into a single hateful word, that's not just offensive. It's tragic. So yes, I pushed back because someone had to. Because silence in the face of bigotry isn't neutral, it's complicit. And because maybe, just maybe, someone watching at home, someone who'd been fed the same lies, saw that conversation and thought, wait, maybe I've been wrong. That's the goal. Not to win arguments, but to open minds. I've always believed in free speech. In fact, I built my entire career on the idea that people should be allowed to speak their minds, even when those views are unpopular, uncomfortable, or downright offensive. But there's a moment, there's always a moment, when that belief is tested. And it came crashing down the day someone sat across from me and called Islam an abomination. Now let me be clearing, I didn't cut his mick. I didn't storm off the set. I let him speak because I believe that when people show you who they are, you should let the world see it too. But what he said wasn't just controversial. It was hateful. This is the clash that defines our times. The line between free speech and hate speech. And if we're being honest, it's not always easy to see where one ends and the other begins. But when that line is crossed, you feel it. You see it in the body language of the people in the room. You hear it in the silence that follows. It's not just offensive, it's corrosive. I asked simple question, why do you believe that? He didn't quote a text. He didn't bring evidence. What followed wasn't debate grounded in philosophy or theology. It was just fear, wrapped in big words, delivered with fake certainty. That's the danger of confusing free speech with hate speech. People think just because they can say something, they should, that they're somehow courageous for offending entire communities. But hate speech isn't brave. It's lazy. It doesn't challenge ideas. It attacks identities. It doesn't inspire thought. It incites anger. He kept insisting, this is just my opinion. I have a right to express it. And yes, he does. That's the paradox. In a free society, we must allow opinions even when they're deeply wrong. But we also have the right, and I'd argue the responsibility, to push back. Because when hate speech hides behind the mask of free speech, it poisons the very freedom it claims to protect. I told him, you're not just criticizing a religion, you're dehumanizing the people who follow it. There's a difference between saying, I disagree with Islamic beliefs, and saying, Islam is an abomination. One is discourse, the other is a verbal weapon. And when you're on a platform that reaches millions, words aren't harmless. They carry weight, they echo, they land in the minds of people already teetering on the edge of prejudice. They give permission to hate. That's why I pushed back, because I've seen what hate speech become it's left unchecked. I've spoken to victims of Islamophobia. I've seen mosques vandalized, children bullied, women harassed for wearing hijab. This isn't theory, it's real life. But here's the twist, shutting people down isn't the answer either. Because the more you censor, the more they play the victim. The consequences of what we say, that's the part people forget. You can say what you want, but so can everyone else. And if your words spread fear, lies, or division, don't be surprised when the world pushes back. I believe in free speech with all my heart. But I also believe in responsibility and decency, in truth. You don't protect freedom by abusing it. You protect it by using it to uplift, challenge, question, and yes, even provoke. But not to destroy, not to dehumanize. That's why when someone uses their voice to target a religion, a race, a group of people, they're not exercising freedom, they're exploiting it. And the irony is, the very freedom they're hiding behind was built by the very people they're tearing down. I ended that interview by saying this, if you think free speech gives you the right to hate, and that no one has the right to challenge you, then you don't understand free speech at all. You just want a microphone without accountability. There was silence. And in that silence, I hope the viewers felt what I felt, that we can't keep confusing hate for honesty, that not every offensive thought is brave, that freedom without truth is just noise. So yes, let people speak. Let them show their true colors. But don't stay quiet when they cross the line. Because silence doesn't make you neutral. It makes you complicit. I used to think I understood Islam. Like many in the West, my knowledge came from what I saw on the news, what I overheard in conversations, and what filtered through movies, politics, and headlines. I thought I had a grasp on it. But looking back, I didn't understand it all. I misunderstood it, just like so many others still do. Islam, for millions in the West, has become a symbol, but not of peace or spirituality or community. It's become a symbol of fear, a symbol of extremism, of foreignness, of the other. And that misunderstanding didn't happen overnight. It's been built over decades, brick by brick, headline by headline, tragedy by tragedy. I remember watching news coverage of global terror attacks and almost always hearing the word Muslim attached to the perpetrator, even before any facts were confirmed. No one said Christian shooter or Buddhist bomber when violence came from elsewhere. But if the attacker was even vaguely connected to Islam, it was immediately center stage. That branding matters. Over time, it rewires how people think. Islam becomes associated not with prayer or peace, but with danger. That's the seed of misunderstanding, and it's been planted in millions of minds. But it's not just about violence, it's also about culture. I remember hearing someone say, Islam is incompatible with Western values. I asked them, which values are you talking about? And they couldn't answer, because deep down, it wasn't about values. It was about fear, fear of difference, fear of tradition, fear of a world that doesn't mirror our own. But if you actually sit down with Muslims, real people, not media constructs, you start to see a different picture. You see that Muslims want what everyone else wants: safety, stability, A good education for their kids, a life of meaning, that's not so different, is it? You see Muslim families holding on to faith while working jobs, going to school, building businesses. You see mosques that open their doors to feed the homeless, regardless of religion. You see Ramadan as a time of reflection, discipline, and community, not some mysterious ritual. But most people in the West never see that. They see veils and turbans and call them threatening. They hear Arabic and assume danger. They see brown skin and think foreign, even when that person was born in London, New York, or Paris. That's what misunderstanding does. It creates distance where there should be connection. And the media doesn't help. Every time there's a crime, reporters seem eager to mention if the suspect is Muslim. But when a Muslim wins a Nobel Prize, builds a tech company, leads a hospital, or becomes a mayor, that barely makes a footnote. And then we wonder why the public has a skewed view. Education hasn't done much to fix it either. In most Western schools, Islam is mentioned once or twice in textbooks, usually in the context of conflict or conquest. Kids aren't taught about Islamic contributions to science, philosophy, medicine, or art. They aren't taught that algebra came from Arabic mathematicians, or that many classic Greek texts were preserved by Muslim scholars while Europe was in the Dark Ages. That history has been erased. And when you erase someone's past, you distort their present. I once interviewed a young Muslim woman who wore a hijab. She told me that every day strangers asked her if she was oppressed or if she had to wear it. But she wore it proudly, not because she was forced to, but because it was part of her identity, her choice, her strength. Imagine being questioned every day for simply living out your faith. That's the kind of silent struggle most people never see. And yet, despite the ignorance, despite the discrimination, most Muslims still choose to build bridges. They show up to interfaith events. They volunteer in their communities. They invite non-Muslims to mosques for open houses. Why? Because they're tired of being misunderstood. They want to be seen, heard, understood for who they really are, not who the world says they are. The biggest irony, Islam and the West aren't enemies. In fact, in many ways they mirror each other. The values of justice, charity, family, discipline, community, these aren't foreign ideas, they're shared principles. And yet, when Islam expresses them, it's seen as other. I believe one of the most powerful things we can do is listen. Just listen, not to pundits or politicians, but to real people. Sit with a Muslim family during Eid. Visit a mosque. Read the Quran, not cherry-picked verses, but the entire text with context. You don't have to convert or agree, but you'll understand. And understanding changes everything. Misunderstanding creates fear, but understanding breeds respect, and respect is the foundation of any peaceful society. I've met Muslims who are proud Brits, proud Americans, proud Canadians, who serve in the military, work in law enforcement, run for office. But somehow they're still asked to prove their loyalty, still asked to explain what they condemn, still held responsible for actions they didn't commit. That's the weight of being misunderstood. It's heavy, and it's unfair. So yes, Islam is misunderstood in the West, but it doesn't have to stay that way, because the cure to ignorance is not silence. It's exposure. It's conversation. It's empathy. It's being willing to admit that maybe, just maybe, we've been looking through the wrong lens all along. And once that lens changes, even a little, you don't see a threat. You see a neighbor. You see a friend. You see a human being.